This is going to be an absolute labyrinth of sesquipedalian bombast, an uncompromising cacophony of sesquipedalian harangue, and a linguistic maelstrom of obscurantist prolixity. Buckle up.
Streaming isn't a real job.
It really isn't.
It isn't. It is and it isn't. It really depends on how much work you want to put into like whatever you're doing.
There's only one streamer that I know personally that has it somewhat rough, but it's his own choice.
Like who?
I would never trade places with Hassan.
Oh.
Ever. In a million years. I don't care how many subs he has, how much money he makes. I would never, ever, 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 ever want to be a political Twitch streamer.
Don't you think?
That's just the most cancerous.
Yeah, this is pretty common among other streamers as well. They look to my side of this universe as like a sadistic infectation, like infestation of the worst kinds of attitudes. Like they have to deal with like a lot of parasocials too, you know, will they, won't theys, stalkers, people trying to foot them. That's fine. Every streamer has to deal with that. Because streaming in terms of like entertainment is in the lowest rung. Okay? Streaming as a form of entertainment is the lowest rung of entertainment. We have it ranges from like being a Twitch streamer to being like a professional athlete, rapper, musician, model, all the way at the tippy top would be like the highest paid actors, right? And I would say that when you're streaming political commentary, because of the nature of this content, because of the nature of the medium, like streaming across the board, you're opening yourself up to all that parasocial and also on top of that, the additional toxicity that comes from politics. And also, if you're on the left side of politics, your enemies are much more vicious too. You get it from every side. You get it from other leftists who have minor ideological differences with you. And those marginal differences are seemingly the greatest problems that no one can ever overcome. And then on top of that, you get this onslaught of sometimes from mainstream media, but oftentimes from right-wingers that come from mainstream media all the way to, you know, neo-Nazis.
Worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
But don't you think he's like a fish in the water with what he's doing? Do you think it's a job for him?
Yeah, he's the only one who's, you know, crazy enough to do that.
No, I mean like the daily average.
What do you mean?
I bet there are certain aspects that
doesn't help that right-wingers have a ton of money they can invest in harassing you. Yeah. Leftists are alone with zero political power or influence. Yes, there is no institutional backing for leftists as well, because you're outside of like the liberal sphere. One, you're outside of the sphere of liberal orgs, right? Because they consider you to be antagonistic to their existence, and you're certainly outside of the interests of right wingers in general.
No, I mean like the daily average.
What do you mean?
I bet there are certain aspects that feel like work to him, but the average streaming that he does, watching news, talking about politics, talking about certain.
So you mean him fighting with his chat 12 hours a day? You think that's fun?
Well, define fun. I think it's just something that gives him fulfillment.
You think, you know, constant death threats every day fun?
Well, that is something that's obviously that sucks. That sucks.
Yeah.
I think one of the worst aspects of this, though, and this is not a woe is me hour or anything like that. I'm very fortunate, make no mistake, but it's constantly being portrayed as someone who doesn't believe the things that he believes. It's so frustrating to be like serially, deliberately misunderstood. You know what I mean? It's so incredibly annoying where people just like put words in your mouth over and over again. Especially when, I mean, I'm live 10 hours a day. My average is what, 7.5 hours this year. Almost every single day. Like, you can tune in and figure out what my worldview is pretty quickly. I just hate when I'm misrepresented over and over again, and then people just like shove that false context, and it doesn't matter. It does not matter what the truth is, and it is so unimaginably frustrating. Like, yeah, it's not even a misunderstanding; it's reframing, so your message falls flat. Exactly. Do you find it difficult to genuinely change your opinion on stuff when people constantly look for hypocrisy? No. If there's something that I change my framework on or change my opinion on with new information, I don't think that that is hypocritical. I think that that is normal and that is the right thing to do. And I used to always get real mad at people who would say, you're backtracking, you're backtracking. And it was like, no, this is new information that I've received, so I'm changing my opinion. And I used to yell at people who would consider that to be backtracking. That's just like debate lordship. It's called learning. It's called growth. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And I'm also pretty open and honest about the growth that I've experienced. I even talked about it with Bradley Martin.
The arcane theater of digital declamation, where we witness yet another episodic unraveling of the interminable histrionics of cybernetic bards and their ontological adversaries. Behold, the ethereal, protean juggernaut of parasocial pandemonium incarnate. Hasanabi, the leftist pontifex of Twitch, an ideological Orpheus perpetually strumming his rhetorical lyre amidst the algorithmic abyss, besieged by the incorporeal chimeras of his detractors, now dissected under the crude, pallid luminescence of one Nmpol, a man whose epistemic architecture seems precariously built upon the shifting sands of reactionary incredulity. Let us render the requisite dissections post-haste. The very premise upon which this dialectical joust predicates itself is one steeped in perfidious reductionism, the ontological validity of streaming as an institution. But what is validity in this postmodern agora of infinite reflexivity? Is not the entire paradigm of human expression a continuum of variegated performativity, each node of communicative engagement an expression of both existential necessity and hegemonic influence? To summarily jettison streaming into the abyss of aesthetic inconsequence is to commit an act of intellectual vandalism so egregious that even Diogenes himself would pause his lantern quest for an honest man to castigate its perpetrators. Palam's assertion that he would rather engage in some jejune pursuit of lesser consequence than inherit the Sisyphean burden of Hasanabi's cybernetic dominion is at best an infantile retreat into the asylum of unexamined privilege. One must inquire, with the kind of forensic scrutiny befitting a scholastic tribunal, whether this pronouncement emanates from a locus of genuine existential disquiet, or merely a performative disdain wrapped in the vestiges of quasi-stoic detachment. To wit, does he eschew the life of a political streamer due to the Sisyphean inevitabilities of ideological combat? Or does he cower before the unremitting deluge of discourse that would force him to tether his ontological moorings to something beyond the meandering insipidity of gamified voyeurism? For in truth, it is not merely the act of streaming that Palam decries, but the particularized agony of engagement with the chimeric leviathan that is political discourse. The digital orator, particularly one whose ideological fulcrum tilts leftward, is not merely a content purveyor, but an ontological lightning rod, a conduit through which the ceaseless static of ideological dissonance finds its most bombastic expression. Hasanabi, the Twitch-bound Marxian autodidact, is thus ensnared in an interminable battle against the hydra-headed monstrosity of misrepresentation, an eternal exercise in semiotic combat against interlocutors who prefer the sophistic distortions of their own projections over the unvarnished truth. But let us, for a moment, navigate the murky tributaries of Palam's aversions to the political streamer's existential crucible. The lamentations of the contemporary e-cynic. The perpetual invocation of the word parasocial as though it were an unassailable indictment, an incantation that unravels the very legitimacy of digital discourse. Pray, tell, what human interaction is devoid of parasocial undercurrents? Did the ancient orators not enthrall the masses with performances that transcended mere dialogue, evoking allegiances that span the breadth of collective consciousness? The parasocial is not an aberration. It is an inevitability of mass communication, a spectral presence that pervades all media, from the murmuring voices of antiquarian philosophers to the digitized incantations of contemporary cyberclerics. Yet, Palam's lamentations extend beyond the mere specter of parasocial engagement. He recoils at the vitriolic tapestry that enshrouds political discourse, as though ideological contention were a mere curio in the annals of human interaction rather than the very fulcrum upon which history pivots. But here we arrive at the crux of his discontent, the unrelenting ire directed toward leftist interlocutors by both reactionary antagonists and ostensible ideological allies alike. This, indeed, is the harrowing tragedy of leftist politics in the digital age, an interminable civil war of dialectical purity, wherein the slightest deviation from orthodoxy is met with inquisitorial fervor, each minor schism metastasizing into an internecine conflagration of unrelenting venom. It is here, amidst the carnivorous tumult of leftist factionalism, that Hasanabi finds himself ceaselessly impaled upon the pikes of his own constituency. The very nature of his rhetorical crusade invites the ire not merely of the right-wing partisans who lurk in the shadowed peripheries of the internet's ideological battlefield, but of those ostensibly aligned with him, wielding their exegetically scalpels with an almost sadomasochistic glee. For there is no adversary more ruthless than the leftist adjudicator of ideological purity, no inquisition more merciless than that conducted by the zealots of internal critique. To be leftist in the digital amphitheater is to be perpetually crucified upon the altar of purity, each doctrinal deviation met with a fusillade of denunciations from erstwhile comrades. Hallam, in his quaint retreat from the afflictions of intellectual engagement, recoils at the sheer viscosity of the maelstrom, the unrelenting adjudication, the ceaseless accusations of performative insincerity, the inexorable torrents of digital castigation. All of these coalesce into an infernal quagmire from which the only escape is outright abdication. And so he stands, an observer at the precipice, peering into the abyss of engagement with the trepidation of a man who fears that ideological immersion may inescapably drown him in the inextricable torrents of perpetual scrutiny. But what, pray, does this retreat signify? Is it not merely the self-preserving lament of one who fears the inevitable crucible of intellectual accountability? To declare political discourse anathema is to surrender to the torpor of apathy, to luxuriate in the insipid waters of epistemic stagnation while the world convulses in the throes of ideological strife. Hallam's preference for the antiseptic detachment of non-engagement is, at its core, a coward's anthem, a dirge for those who would rather spectate than participate, who find solace in the anesthetized inertia of indifference rather than the fiery tribulations of ideological struggle. Hasanabi, for all his voluminous pontifications and mercurial tirades, embodies the essential tragedy of the modern leftist orator, a man beleaguered not merely by the vitriolic ire of the opposition, but by the relentless scrutinization of his own camp, a Sisyphean combatant rolling the boulder of discourse up the mountain of mass consciousness, only for it to be ceaselessly hurled downward by those who claim to march alongside him. To be a leftist streamer is not merely to be a purveyor of digital declamations, but a martyr in the ever-churning inferno of internecine critique. And so, as Hasanabi continues his inexorable march through the unrelenting purgatory of digital discourse, let it be known that while his path is one fraught with relentless opposition, ceaseless misrepresentation, and perpetual vitriol,